There are moments in a person's life that split time into two halves, the before and the after. Moments so sudden, so visceral, that the mind needs a full breath just to catch up with what the eyes have already seen. For Prince William, that moment came on a warm summer evening in the year 2000, on the lawns of Highgrove House, surrounded by his father's circle of friends. The murmur of polite conversation in the air, glasses raised, laughter drifting across the garden. He was moving through the guests the way he always did at these gatherings, present enough to be polite, distant enough to survive. And then his eyes caught something small, something that should have been unremarkable from where he stood. A necklace, fine chain, a small pendant. Nothing that would stop most people cold. But William was not most people. And that necklace, that particular necklace, did not belong at Highgrove. It did not belong on the woman who was wearing it. Because the last time William had seen it, it was resting at his mother's collarbone. Stay with me. Because what happened next, the conversation on the lawn, the door he knocked on before dawn, the words spoken in a quiet room, none of it went the way anyone expected. And all of it reveals something about who William truly is that the world rarely gets to see. Setting the scene. To understand the weight of what William saw that evening, you have to understand where he was standing. Not just physically, but emotionally. It was the summer of 2000. Princess Diana had been gone for nearly 3 years. 3 years of grief that the royal family had processed in the way the royal family processes most things, quietly, carefully, and behind very closed doors. Camilla Parker Bowles was no longer a secret by this point. She and Charles had appeared publicly together the previous year. The photographs had been everywhere, on the front pages, in the tabloids, scrutinized by a public that was still, in many ways, raw from losing Diana. William had looked at those photographs once. Just once. He had not looked again. He had been managing it. That was the word he used to himself. Managing. The way you manage something you have decided to accept without ever being asked whether you accept it. The gathering at Highgrove that evening was small. A handful of people from Charles's inner circle. The kind of evening that had become ordinary in a way William was still learning to tolerate. Harry was somewhere across the lawn, laughing at something. Easier in these spaces than his brother, or at least appearing to be. William had always admired that about Harry, even if he didn't say it. Camilla was there. She was usually there now. William moved through the guests. He answered when spoken to. He smiled when it was required. He was, to anyone watching casually, entirely present. But here is the thing about people who have learned to grieve quietly. They are always watching. They are always noticing. The eye catches things the mind hasn't yet named. It was perhaps an hour into the evening when his gaze swept across the terrace and snagged on something. He looked again. He needed a moment. The necklace at Camilla's throat was not elaborate. It didn't call attention to itself. A fine gold chain. A small pendant that caught the light just so. He knew it. He just needed a moment to find where from. And then it arrived, not as a thought, but as a feeling first. A specific evening at Kensington Palace. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. His mother was getting ready for an official dinner. He was sitting on the edge of her bed the way he sometimes did in those years, watching her prepare. The ritual of it comforting in the way that ordinary, repeated moments are comforting to children. She had her back to the mirror. She had put on the necklace. She had turned to ask him something. Something small, something ordinary. Whether he'd eaten, whether Harry was in bed. He couldn't remember the exact words. But he remembered the necklace. He remembered the way she touched it, her fingertips briefly grazing her collarbone before she turned away. The unconscious gesture of someone checking that something precious is still there. He had watched her do that more than once. And now here it was. on someone else's neck, in his father's garden, and the woman wearing it was smiling at the man beside her, completely unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that across the terrace a young man had just gone very, very still. The confrontation. Here is what lesser men would have done in that moment. Nothing. They would have looked away. They would have finished their drink and gone to find Harry and laughed at something and not mentioned it to anyone. William did not do that. He put down his glass. He crossed the terrace. Camilla saw him coming. She was, by all accounts, someone with a remarkable ability to read a room, to sense the emotional temperature of a situation before it arrived. Her expression adjusted, not dramatically, not with alarm, just the slight recalibration of a woman who had been navigating difficult social terrain for decades. She turned to face him. She offered the careful smile. "William." He stopped in front of her. "That necklace," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she glanced down at it, the instinctive gesture of someone suddenly made conscious of what they are wearing. "Do you like it?" she said lightly, the tone of someone who was not yet sure what kind of conversation this was going to be. Now, pause here for just a second. Put yourself in that moment. You are standing in the middle of a social gathering. There are people within earshot. You are 21 years old. And you have just recognized on a woman's throat something that belongs to your mother. What do you say? William said exactly what the moment demanded. "That was my mother's." Not loudly, but not quietly enough to be missed. He hadn't planned to say it. The words had come before he could weigh them. The particular way certain truths arrive when the body understands something before the mind has fully caught up. He stood there and felt the full weight of what he had just done. Named it, out loud, in front of people. The conversations around them didn't stop, but something in the air changed. Something shifted just enough for the nearest guest to register it. That particular atmospheric drop that comes before something real happens in a room full of performance. Camilla held his gaze. She did not look away. "I know," she said. A pause. "Your father gave it to me." William did not move. He did not respond. He stood there for a moment as if deciding whether to say more, and then he didn't. The silence was more devastating than any words he might have added. Camilla was the one who broke it. She turned back to the person beside her and said something that William didn't hear. Her voice was perfectly steady. He walked away. The conversations around them resumed, but slightly too quickly, with the particular energy of people who have collectively decided not to look directly at what just happened. He went upstairs. He sat on the edge of the bed in the room he had always used at Highgrove. And he thought. He had not planned to confront Camilla. He had not gone to her with a script or a demand. But once he had seen the necklace, he could not unsee it. And now that he knew, not as suspicion but as confirmed fact, that his father had given it to her, he needed more before he could decide what to do. He needed the full picture. The woman in the kitchen. Here's a detail that tells you everything about who William is as a person. He didn't go to his father first. He could have. And he knew exactly what that conversation would have looked like. A clean version, managed, the kind of explanation that closes questions rather than opens them. His father was skilled at those conversations. William had watched him conduct them his whole life. He needed something else first. He needed to understand. He went to find a member of the household staff, an older woman who had worked at Kensington Palace during his childhood. Someone who had been present. Someone who remembered. He found her in the kitchen, alone. He closed the door. He described the necklace as best he could. She listened without interrupting him. When he finished, there was a pause, the kind that tells you the other person knows exactly what you're talking about and is deciding how much to say. "I think I know the piece," she said carefully. "Was it my mother's?" William asked. She looked at him. "For a time," she said. "Yes. What happened to it?" There was a long pause, the look of someone measuring their words against their loyalty to a boy they had watched grow up. "I'm not certain," she said slowly. "There was a period. Things were very difficult between your parents. Several things disappeared from her room during that time, things she'd been given." Another pause. "I always thought she gave them back, but I don't know for certain." The kitchen was very quiet. "Did she regret it?" William asked. The woman was quiet for a long moment. "She asked about it once," she said. "Not directly, but I understood what she was asking." She looked at her hands. "I think she did." William nodded. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him with the steadiness of someone who has worked around grief long enough to recognize it in all its forms. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what it's worth." "It's worth something," he said. He stood in the kitchen after she left. He had what he needed. Not certainty, but enough. Enough to know that his mother had not simply given the necklace away. She had given it back during a moment of pain. And pain, as every person who has ever been in pain knows, makes you put things down that you never actually wanted to release. And it was now on Camilla. Not stolen, not taken, but wrong. He couldn't explain exactly why it was wrong. He just knew that it was. And he knew that he wasn't going to be able to leave it alone. He walked to his father's study. He stood outside the door for a long moment before knocking. Not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, but because he did. And saying it would change something that might not be changeable afterward. He knocked anyway. The conversation with Charles. Charles was at his desk. He looked up when William came in with the practiced composure of a man who had been waiting for this without admitting to himself that he was waiting. "How was the rest of the evening?" he said, the tone of someone reaching for normal. William didn't sit down. "Camilla's necklace," he said, "the one she had on earlier." Charles stopped, set down his pen. "Where did it come from?" "It's something I've had for a while," Charles said carefully. "From a time ago." "Does it matter where?" William looked at him, a silence that stretched. "Your mother had it," Charles said quietly. "For a time." "She returned it," William said. Something shifted in his father's expression. The particular recalibration of a man who has just understood that the conversation he believed he was controlling is not the conversation that is actually happening. The recognition that someone knows more than you assumed. "Yes," Charles said carefully. "She did." "After an argument," William said. "A bad one. She gave it back in the middle of it." He held his father's gaze. "She didn't mean it to be permanent." The room was very quiet. Charles leaned back. He looked at his son, really looked at him, with the expression of a man who is being seen in a way he is not accustomed to. "You spoke to someone," he said. "Yes." Charles looked toward the window. The garden was dark beyond the glass. "It was mine," he said. "After she returned it, it was mine." "I know," William said. "Then you understand." "I understand that you gave it to Camilla," William said. "That's what I understand." Now let that sit for a moment. Because this is not a young man losing his composure. This is not a scene. This is something much more controlled, and therefore much more powerful. William is not accusing. He is not demanding. He is laying out facts with the precision of someone who has thought very carefully about every word. "Did you think about what that meant for us?" William said. "For me and Harry." Charles didn't answer. "I was 8 years old," William said. "I sat on her bed and watched her put it on." A pause. "I recognized it tonight." The room was so quiet you could have heard anything. Charles looked at the desk. When he finally spoke, it was quietly enough to mean something. "I'm sorry," he said. William nodded. "One more thing," he said. Camilla knew that it was Mom's. Charles was quiet. Did she ask you about it? William said. Or did she simply not mind? Charles didn't answer. William nodded again. He left. He didn't sleep well. He lay in the dark and thought about everything. What his father had said, what the woman in the kitchen had said, the specific way his mother used to touch the necklace at her collarbone before she turned away. He thought about the fact that she had given it back. Not because she wanted to, because she was in pain. Because pain makes you put things down even when you don't want to. And by the time light came through the curtains, he had made his decision. The morning. The next morning, Charles was at breakfast alone when William came downstairs. Charles looked up. He had the particular quality of a man who had not slept and was not going to acknowledge it. William sat down. He didn't pour coffee. He didn't look at the garden. He looked at his father. "It shouldn't be on her," he said. Charles looked at him. "I'm not making a scene," William said. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm telling you how it is for me." A pause. "She wore something that was Mom's. Whether Mom gave it back or not, I remember it on her. Harry would too, if he saw it." Charles said nothing. "I'm asking you to sort it out," William said. "That's all." Charles did not answer immediately. He looked at his son for a long moment, not weighing the request, but weighing what it would mean to agree to it. The cost of it. The shape it would give to the space between them. "You're asking me to choose," he said. William didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "I'm asking you to understand." A long silence. Charles looked at the table. Then he nodded, once. It was enough, not because it solved anything, not because it made sense of the past or explained the years of silence or gave William back what he had lost, but because for the first time, in that room, in that house, on that particular morning, something true had been said that could not be explained away. And it had been heard. Harry and the steps. That afternoon, Harry found him outside. William was sitting on the back steps of Highgrove, looking at nothing in particular. The garden was quiet. Most of the guests had already gone. The weekend was over, and the house had returned to that particular stillness that follows a gathering. The noise gone, just the family, the staff, and the silence. Harry sat down beside him without being asked. He didn't ask if he could. He just sat. "You okay?" he said. "Fine," William said. Harry looked at him the way Harry looks at people, direct, assessing, that particular gaze that people always underestimated because it usually came in a face that was laughing. "You seem different today," Harry said. "Do I?" "Yeah." A pause. "Better, actually." William looked out at the garden. "Something happened last night," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "Something I needed to sort out," William said. "With Dad?" William glanced at him. "With a few people," he said. Harry nodded slowly. He looked out at the garden, too. "Camilla left this morning," Harry said. "She seemed—" He paused, choosing the word carefully. "Off." William said nothing. "She and Dad had words, I think," Harry said. "Before she left." He said it casually, but he was watching William. A pause. "Okay," William said. Harry looked at him. Something passed between them. Not a full explanation, not a complete accounting, just the particular shorthand of two people who have learned to communicate in a language made mostly of silences. Harry watched him a second longer than usual, as if deciding whether to ask something more. He decided not to. Instead, he handed William his drink. William took it. They sat in the silence for a while. The garden was very still. It was enough. Who William is. Those who knew William during those years, really knew him, say he carried his mother differently than Harry did. Harry carried her loudly, in the causes he championed, in the way he spoke her name when everyone else had learned not to. Harry's grief was public and vocal, and it moved through the world with force, a river that couldn't be dammed. William carried her quietly, in the things he noticed, in the things he didn't say until he had to. The necklace was one of those things. And here is what the necklace story actually reveals. Not about Charles, not about Camilla, but about William himself. He didn't lose control. He didn't make a scene. He didn't go to the press. He didn't make demands or ultimatums or speeches. He asked questions. He gathered information. He went to the right people. He spoke to his father in private. He said what was true and only what was true. And he protected something. Not the necklace. The necklace was never the point. The point was a specific evening at Kensington Palace. A boy, 8 years old, sitting on his mother's bed. The ritual of watching her get ready. The particular way she touched the necklace at her collarbone before she turned away. The unconscious gesture of someone checking that something precious is still there. That moment belonged to William. It was his. It lived inside him in the specific way that small, ordinary moments live inside people who have lost someone. Not as a grand memory, but as a texture, a feeling, a detail so precise it almost hurts. And he was not going to let it be contaminated. He did what was needed, quietly, without drama, with the particular composure of someone who has learned that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to perform your grief for other people's comfort. The aftermath. Camilla was not seen wearing the necklace again, not after that night, not in William's presence, not, as far as anyone could tell, anywhere else. The necklace was never mentioned again, not publicly, not in any of the accounts that trickled out over the years. No one issued a statement. No one gave an interview. No courtier went on background to explain what had happened that weekend. But something had changed. Anyone who observed the dynamic between William and his father in the months that followed could feel it. Something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, a line drawn with precision rather than fury. Charles, for his part, had heard his son. He had nodded. And then he had done what needed to be done. What does it mean that Camilla knew the necklace was Diana's? Think about that for a moment, because it's the question William himself asked, and the one his father refused to answer. Did Camilla ask about it? Did she simply choose not to mind? Did she wear it knowing exactly what it was? Or did she push that knowledge to the edges of her awareness the way people push things they don't want to examine too directly? We don't know. We can't know. But William asked the question, and Charles's silence answered it. There is a version of this story in which Camilla is a villain. There is a version in which she is simply a complicated woman who made a complicated choice. There is a version in which Charles is cruel, and a version in which he is simply human in the specific way that powerful men who have always had what they wanted tend to be human, blind to the particular cost of their choices on the people around them. What none of those versions can change is this. William was 8 years old. He sat on his mother's bed. He watched her put on a necklace. And 23 years later, he recognized it across a lawn and walked across that lawn and said what was true. That is not nothing. That is everything. The broader picture. Here is something that rarely gets said about William. He is not a man who asks for much. He was trained from birth, quite literally trained, with the specific, systematic preparation that heir-apparent children receive to want less than other people, to manage his emotions rather than express them, to be the steady one, to hold the institution together even when the institution was doing things to him that would have broken someone less conditioned. His parents' marriage was one of the most publicly documented disasters in modern royal history, and yet William was inside it. He was not watching from the outside, seeing the tabloid headlines and the televised interviews and the Diana tapes. He was in the house. He was at the dinners. He was on the steps of the school when the cameras were waiting. He was the one who held his mother's hand in public and then went back inside and had to be something other than a grieving child. The necklace incident, and I want you to hold this thought, was not actually about the necklace. It was about a boy who had spent the better part of his life being asked to accept things he was never asked to accept. The end of his parents' marriage, his mother's anguish, her death, his father's relationship, Camilla's presence at every gathering, the gradual, relentless normalization of a reality that nobody ever directly asked him if he could bear. He had been managing. That was his word, managing. And then he saw the necklace. And something in him, something that had been managing very quietly for a very long time, decided that this particular thing was not going to be managed. This one, he was going to name. He was going to walk across the terrace and stand in front of the woman wearing it and say, out loud, in front of people, "That was my mother's." And then he was going to go upstairs and find out everything he needed to know. And then he was going to knock on his father's door. And he was going to say what was true, without rage, without drama, without any of the things that would have allowed the moment to be dismissed. Just the facts. Just the truth. Just, I was 8 years old. I sat on her bed. I recognized it tonight. That is who William is. And it is not who the tabloids have ever particularly understood how to write about. Because he doesn't give them the material they know how to handle. He doesn't explode. He doesn't forgive ostentatiously. He doesn't tweet or Instagram his grief or grant intimate access to journalists who will package his wounds into copy. He carries it. He notices. He acts, precisely, and only when precision is required. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to genuinely think about it. If you had been William that evening, if you had crossed that terrace and seen what he saw, what would you have done? Most of us would have looked away. Most of us have been trained in our own lives to manage, to absorb, to let things go because the cost of not letting them go seems too high. The confrontation too dangerous, the potential for misunderstanding too great. William didn't let it go, not because he wanted a fight, not because he was looking for one, but because some things, some moments, belong to you. Some memories have your name on them in a way that no argument, no legal technicality about who owns what, no passage of time can change. And when those moments are violated, even quietly, even accidentally, even by someone who perhaps didn't fully reckon with what they were doing, you have the right to say so. William said so. And Charles listened. And Camilla was never seen wearing the necklace again. There is something profound in that. Not triumphant. Grief is never triumphant, but true. Profoundly, quietly, irreversibly true. Diana had touched that necklace at her collarbone before she turned away from the mirror. Her fingertips had checked it was still there, the gesture of someone keeping something close. Her son had made sure it stayed close, not to himself, not physically, but in the right place, in memory, where it belonged. That is love without performance. That is grief without spectacle. And in a family, in a dynasty, that has made an art form of spectacle, there is something almost startling about that. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about William, about what it costs to carry grief quietly, about what it means to say something true at exactly the right moment, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, do you think William was right to confront his father? Could you have done the same? Or would you have looked away? The comment section is yours. Subscribe for more stories about the people behind the crowns, the private moments, the untold truths, the human beings beneath the history.